I met Megan a year after my divorce. I wasn't looking for love. Honestly, I wasn't looking for anything except stability for myself and Lucas, my son from my first marriage. But Megan had a way of drawing people in. She was radiant in every sense of the word, vivacious and supportive, the kind of woman who made you believe the past didn't matter because the future was hers to shape. And for a while, I bought into the dream she sold. We married quickly, maybe too quickly, in hindsight. Megan seemed perfect, ambitious yet warm, and endlessly attentive. She took an interest in Lucas, too, making an effort to bond with him during his sporadic visits home from college. It meant the world to me, watching them laugh over dinner or exchange playful barbs during family board games. For the first time in years, I felt I could breathe. My career as a software engineer was stable, and Megan's charm lit up even the dullest of days. She made me feel seen, in a way my ex-wife never did. I was finally moving on, and so was Lucas. Or so I thought. The first sign of trouble was subtle, almost imperceptible, a missed kiss before I left for work, Megan's phone always face down on the table. "Work's just hectic," she'd say, her vibrant smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You know how it is." And I did know, my job at Gregory Solutions was no walk in the park. My boss, Gregory, was a stickler for perfection and kept me on edge. I figured Megan's world was just as demanding, and I didn't press her about it. But the changes didn't stop there. Megan started pulling away from intimacy, blaming exhaustion or headaches. Weekend plans turned into her needing some time to herself, and she'd vanish for hours on end, her excuses growing thinner with each disappearance. It was the little things that stood out, half-finished conversations, hurried goodbyes. I chalked it up to stress or maybe the adjustment to married life. After all, no relationship is perfect. Lucas began visiting less, his phone calls shorter, his tone clipped. When I asked if something was bothering him, he brushed it off, saying, "I'm just busy, Dad." I told myself it was the natural distance that comes with a kid growing up. I didn't realize how much of that space Megan was filling. The turning point came on a random Tuesday. Megan had been out late, running errands, and I stayed up watching reruns of an old sitcom, trying not to overthink the silence in our home. My phone buzzed, a reminder for the company meeting Gregory had scheduled. Gregory always scheduled meetings for the next day but never cared about the timing. When Megan came home that night, her smile was back, too bright to be real. "Long day," she murmured, kissing my cheek with a hint of detachment. Her lipstick left a faint stain on my collar, a mark of her absence rather than affection. That night, as I lay awake, I couldn't shake the unease creeping into my chest. Something felt off, and for the first time since marrying Megan, I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination. Was it possible that I was seeing shadows where there was light? Or had the cracks in our perfect picture started to show? Looking back, I should have trusted that gnawing feeling. It was the beginning of the end, the moment when the pieces of our life together stopped fitting, no matter how hard I tried to hold them together. Some truths hit you like a slow burn, a creeping realization that things aren't what they seem. Others slam into you like a wrecking ball, leaving no time to prepare for the devastation. What I discovered about Megan was the latter. Megan's behavior was becoming harder to ignore. She was glued to her phone, always darting out of the room when it buzzed. "Just a group chat with the girls," she'd say, her laugh light but unconvincing. Her avoidance of intimacy was no longer just occasional, it had become the norm. When I asked if something was wrong, she brushed it off with a practiced ease that made me feel foolish for even asking. I tried to dismiss the growing unease, but it followed me like a shadow. At work, I buried myself in code, but my mind always wandered back to her hurried goodbyes and the distant look in her eyes. Gregory, my boss, seemed to notice my distraction. "You've been off lately, Tommy," he said one afternoon during a staff meeting. His tone was casual, but his piercing gaze felt anything but. A week later, Gregory summoned me to his office. He rarely invited me in, preferring to communicate through terse emails or quick hallway exchanges. The summons itself was unsettling, but the smirk on his face when I entered made my stomach churn. "Close the door," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. His office was as immaculate as ever, every book and paper perfectly aligned. Gregory thrived on control, and it showed in everything he did. I sat down, trying to ignore the unease clawing at my chest. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together with the kind of calm arrogance that only someone like Gregory could pull off. "I thought you should know something, Tommy," he said, his smirk widening. "Something personal." My jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" He slid his laptop across the desk, the screen already lit. "Take a look." The video started playing, and it took me a moment to process what I was seeing. Megan. My wife. Sitting on a couch in what looked like a lavish hotel room. Gregory entered the frame, his hand grazing her shoulder, and then, the unthinkable. They kissed, her hand sliding down his chest as she smiled up at him with a look I hadn't seen in months. My breath caught in my throat. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice low and sharp. Gregory's smirk never wavered. "This, my dear Tommy, is what's been happening behind your back. Megan and I, well, let's just say she's been keeping me very entertained." My hands balled into fists, my mind reeling as the video continued. Megan leaned into him, her laughter soft and intimate, as if they were the only two people in the world. I felt like I was suffocating. "How long?" I choked out. Gregory's expression turned mocking. "Months. She's quite the actress, isn't she? But don't feel too bad, Tommy. She's the one who came to me. Said she needed more." He chuckled, the sound grating against my ears. I wanted to punch him, to wipe that smug grin off his face, but I stayed frozen in my seat, my world crumbling around me. And then he dropped the final bomb. "Oh, and your son," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Lucas, right? She's been playing games with him too." My head snapped up. "What the hell are you talking about?" Gregory leaned forward, his smirk twisting into something darker. "Megan's quite the multitasker. She's been cozying up to your boy, using his vulnerabilities to get closer. Let's just say she knows how to make herself indispensable." The words didn't register at first. "Lucas? My son?" The thought was too grotesque, too impossible. But the look in Gregory's eyes told me he wasn't lying. "You're sick," I hissed, my voice trembling with rage. He shrugged. "Maybe. But I'm not the one who married her." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You're lying," I spat. "Am I?" he countered, leaning back again. "Feel free to ask her yourself. Or better yet, ask Lucas." I stormed out of his office, my chest tight with a mix of fury and disbelief. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of betrayal and anger. Megan's actions were one thing, but involving Lucas? It was unforgivable. When I got home, Megan was sitting on the couch, her phone in hand. She looked up, her face lighting up with that practiced smile. "Hey, how was work?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I walked past her, my mind racing. I needed proof, something concrete to confirm Gregory's claims. My trust in Megan was gone, but I still needed to know the full truth. That night, as she slept, I unlocked her phone using the passcode I had memorized months ago. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages, each one a dagger to my chest. The texts with Gregory were explicit, filled with promises and innuendos that left no room for doubt. But what shattered me completely were the messages to Lucas. They weren't romantic, but they were manipulative, exploiting his insecurities and drawing him into her web. By the time I put the phone down, my hands were trembling, and my heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted to help rebuild my life, had destroyed everything. I sat in the dark, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself, or the realization that I had ignored all the signs. Megan's distance, Lucas's sudden withdrawal, it was all connected, and I had been too blind to see it. But I saw it now. And I wasn't going to let it go unanswered. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I didn't want revenge, I wanted the truth. But as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror that morning, I realized the truth alone wouldn't be enough. I needed Megan to face what she'd done, to see the destruction she caused. And I needed Lucas to know I was still his father, no matter what. The first step was getting the video. Gregory, in all his arrogance, underestimated me. I spent the afternoon poring over the company network, leveraging backdoors I'd helped design years ago. Gregory wasn't as tech-savvy as he liked to pretend. Within an hour, I had the files. Videos, emails, and timestamps, I secured them all on a USB drive, shaking with a mix of triumph and disgust. When I walked out of the office that evening, the weight of what I carried was almost unbearable. I wasn't just holding evidence of Megan's betrayal. I was carrying the remains of my marriage, my dignity, and what little trust one had left in the people I loved. Dinner that night was eerily normal. Megan hummed as she set the table, the aroma of lasagna filling the air. Lucas said he might stop by later, she said casually, her voice as light as if nothing had changed. That's good, I replied, forcing a smile as I sat down. My appetite was non-existent, but I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine. We ate in silence for a while, the clinking of cutlery the only sound. Finally, I cleared my throat. How was your day? I asked, my tone deliberately neutral. Megan hesitated, her fork hovering midair. Busy, she said quickly. Lots of errands. Errands, I repeated, leaning back in my chair. That's funny. Gregory said the same thing about his day. Her hand froze. She looked up, her smile faltering. You talked to Gregory? I did, I said, my voice calm. He had some interesting things to share. Megan's expression hardened, her defenses rising. Tommy, if this is about work. Oh, it's not about work, I interrupted, standing and walking to the TV. I inserted the USB drive into the port, turning back to face her. It's about this. The video began to play, the room filling with the sound of Megan's laughter as she leaned into Gregory's embrace. Her face paled as she watched, her fork clattering onto her plate. What the hell is this? She demanded, her voice rising in panic. You tell me, I said, crossing my arms. How long, Megan? How long have you been lying to me? She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. Gregory's lying, he's trying to ruin us. I laughed bitterly. Oh, so he fabricated this? The timestamps, the emails, the texts, all fake. Megan's eyes darted to the screen, her mind scrambling for an escape. You've been distant, she said suddenly, her tone shifting. You've been so caught up in work, in Lucas, that I felt invisible. I stared at her, incredulous. So this is my fault. You're blaming me for your affair. You don't understand, she cried, tears brimming in her eyes. I needed someone to notice me, to make me feel. Don't you dare, I snapped, my voice cutting through her excuses. Don't you dare make this about you. You had a choice, Megan. And you chose this. She broke down, sinking into the chair and burying her face in her hands. Her sobs filled the room, but I felt no sympathy. This wasn't guilt, it was self-pity. The front door creaked open, and Lucas's voice called out, Dad? Megan? Are you here? I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder. His eyes widened as he took in the scene, the frozen video on the TV, Megan's tear-streaked face, and my expression, hard as stone. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion and fear. I looked at him, my heart breaking all over again. "Lucas, sit down," I said softly. "We need to talk." He hesitated, then set his bag down and took a seat, his gaze darting between me and Megan. "Is this about?" His voice trailed off, and he looked away, shame written all over his face. "It's about everything," I said, my voice heavy with emotion. "Lucas, tell me the truth. Did she?" "Yes," he said, cutting me off. His voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands. "She did. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know what to do." My legs felt like they might give out, but I stayed standing. "What do you mean?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Lucas looked up, his eyes red. "She started texting me a few months ago, saying she wanted to make sure I was okay. At first, I thought she was just being nice, but then, she started getting close. Too close. I tried to push her away, but she kept saying things, about how you didn't understand her, how she felt alone." Megan let out a strangled sob, but I ignored her. My focus was on Lucas. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice cracking. He shook his head. "I was scared. I thought you'd hate me. I didn't want to ruin things." "You didn't ruin anything," I said firmly, my chest tightening. "This isn't your fault, Lucas. None of it is." The room was silent except for Megan's muffled cries. I looked at her, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You used him," I said, my voice low and cold. "You manipulated my son to cover your lies." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I was just lost." "No," I said sharply. "You weren't lost. You knew exactly what you were doing." Lucas stood abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. "I'm done," he said, his voice shaking. "I can't be here right now." "Lucas," Megan began, but he cut her off. "Don't," he said, his voice firm. "Don't talk to me." He stormed out, the door slamming behind him. I turned back to Megan, my jaw tight. "I want you out," I said. "Tonight." "Tommy, please," she begged, reaching for me. "We can fix this. I can change." I stepped back, shaking my head. "It's too late, Megan. You didn't just break my trust, you destroyed it. Now leave." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't waver. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control what came next. And it started with letting Megan face the consequences of her actions. When Megan finally left that night, dragging her suitcase behind her like a mark of shame, the house felt suffocatingly silent. I sat on the couch staring at the blank TV screen, trying to process everything that had just happened. The anger was there, burning hot, but beneath it was an ache so deep it felt like it would swallow me whole. How had it come to this? I'd given Megan everything. After my first marriage crumbled, I swore I'd do better if I ever got a second chance. I wanted to be the kind of husband who prioritized his partner, who didn't let the day-to-day grind get in the way of making someone feel loved. And for Megan, I thought I'd done that. I thought wrong. The memories came flooding back, our wedding day, her smile lighting up the room as we exchanged vows. The late-night conversations about our future, where we dreamed of travel and growing old together. It all felt so hollow now, like an elaborate set design meant to distract me from the truth. And then there was Lucas. I'd failed him, too. I hadn't been there enough after the divorce. He'd been just a kid, trying to navigate the split while I was too wrapped up in my own misery to notice how much he needed me. I told myself I was doing the best I could, that the weekend visits and occasional phone calls were enough. But they weren't. And Megan had exploited that. The thought of her manipulating Lucas, of twisting his loneliness into something dark and selfish, made my stomach turn. How could someone I loved so deeply do something so cruel? The next day, Lucas came back. I didn't expect him to. I thought he'd need more time to process everything. But there he was, standing in the doorway, his face a mixture of guilt and hesitation. "Dad," he said softly. "Come in," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Lucas broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "For everything." I looked at him, my chest tightening. "You don't have to apologize," I said. "This wasn't your fault." "But I should have told you," he insisted. "I should have stopped her, but I didn't know how." He looked so much like the little boy I used to know, the one who'd cling to my hand when he was scared. And now here he was, grown up but still carrying the weight of things he shouldn't have to bear. "Lucas," I said, my voice softening, "you were put in an impossible situation. What Megan did was wrong, she used you. But that doesn't change how I feel about you. You're my son, and I love you." His eyes filled with tears, and he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, too, Dad." We talked for hours after that, unraveling the mess Megan had left behind. Lucas told me how it started, how she reached out to him under the guise of wanting to be a supportive stepmom. At first, he thought she genuinely cared, but over time, her intentions became clearer. "She'd say things about you," Lucas admitted, his voice heavy with shame. "About how you didn't notice her, how she felt neglected. And he paused, taking a shaky breath. "I thought if I kept her happy, it would help." Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. Megan's betrayal wasn't just about what she did to me, it was about the wedge she drove between me and my son. "You don't have to carry that anymore," I said firmly. "Megan's gone. We're going to move forward, together. Okay?" Lucas nodded, and for the first time in what felt like years, I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. After Lucas left that evening, I sat alone again, the quiet of the house settling around me like a heavy blanket. My mind drifted to the sacrifices I'd made for Megan, the late nights working overtime to afford the life she wanted, the way I'd put her happiness ahead of my own time and time again. And for what? The anger bubbled to the surface again, but this time, it felt sharper, more focused. Megan wasn't just going to walk away from this unscathed. She needed to face the consequences of what she'd done, not just to me, but to Lucas. I pulled out my laptop and started drafting an email to my attorney. I wasn't just filing for divorce. I was going to fight for full custody of everything that mattered, my house, my savings, and most importantly, my relationship with my son. Megan had taken enough from me. That night, Lucas texted me. "Lucas, thanks for today, Dad. It means a lot." You don't have to thank me. I'll always be here for you." "Lucas, I know. I want to make things right." We will. Together." As I set my phone down, I felt a strange mix of emotions, pain, anger, but also a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Megan had broken my trust, but she hadn't broken me. And she hadn't broken Lucas. We'd rebuild. One step at a time. Revenge wasn't something I'd ever sought before. I was the kind of man who believed in fairness and reason, the kind of man who walked away from fights rather than escalating them. But Gregory and Megan had pushed me past my limits. This wasn't about petty vengeance, it was about exposing the truth and reclaiming my dignity. Gregory's wife, Elaine, was an elegant woman, the picture of grace and poise. When I called her, I wasn't sure what to expect. Would she even believe me? But as soon as I mentioned Gregory's name and the video evidence, the controlled tone in her voice cracked. "When and where?" she asked, her words sharp and deliberate. "Tomorrow night," I replied. "At your house. Make sure Gregory is there." The next evening, I arrived at Gregory's lavish home, a USB drive in my pocket and a quiet determination in my chest. The dinner party was already in full swing when I walked in. Gregory, ever the charismatic host, greeted me with a smug grin, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Tommy," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Thought I'd stop by," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Elaine appeared moments later, her face a mask of composure. She gave me a slight nod, a silent confirmation that she was ready. We waited until dessert was being served. The laughter and chatter around the table felt like a mockery of everything I'd endured, but I held my ground. Finally, Elaine cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Gregory," she said, her voice calm but icy. "Tommy has something to share with us." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. Gregory's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. I pulled out the USB drive and held it up. "I think it's time we all see the truth," I said, walking over to the large television mounted on the wall. "Tommy, what are you doing?" Gregory asked, his tone no longer confident. "You'll see," I replied, plugging the drive into the TV. The video began to play, and the room erupted in gasps and murmurs as Megan's face appeared on the screen, followed by Gregory's. Their intimacy was undeniable, their betrayal laid bare for everyone to see. Elaine stood, her face pale but resolute. "How long, Gregory?" she demanded, her voice trembling with controlled fury. Gregory stammered, his charm disintegrating under the weight of the evidence. "Elaine, I can explain." "Don't," she snapped, her voice slicing through the air. "Don't you dare." The party dissolved into chaos as Elaine ordered Gregory out of the house. Guests whispered among themselves, some trying to comfort her, others too shocked to speak. Gregory, stripped of his usual arrogance, slunk away without another word. When I got home, Megan was waiting for me. She must have heard about what happened, because the moment I walked in, she was already crying. "Tommy, please," she began, reaching for me. I stepped back, holding up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "Please," she pleaded. "We can fix this. I made a mistake, but I love you." "You love yourself," I interrupted. "And that's fine. But you don't get to do it here anymore." Her tears intensified, but I didn't falter. "Pack your things," I said. "Go live with the one you betrayed me with." "Tommy, You're not getting the house. You're not getting the savings. You get nothing, Megan. Nothing." Her sobs turned to anger, but I didn't care. I'd spent enough time giving her the benefit of the doubt, making excuses for her actions. This was her consequence, and it was long overdue. Megan left that night, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt like mine again. Lucas came over the next day, and we began the slow process of rebuilding. I suggested therapy, and to my relief, he agreed. "I want to fix this, Dad," he said during one of our sessions. "I want us to be okay. We will be," I promised him. "It's going to take time, but we'll get there." Looking back, the betrayal cut deeper than I ever thought possible. It wasn't just about Megan's affair or Gregory's smug arrogance, it was about the cracks it revealed in my life, the things I'd ignored or taken for granted. I learned that self-respect isn't just about standing up for yourself when things fall apart, it's about recognizing the red flags before they become fires. It's about valuing yourself enough to demand honesty and integrity from the people you love. But most of all, I learned that healing isn't something you do alone. It's messy and painful, but it's worth it, especially when you're doing it for the people who truly matter. To everyone reading this, I have to ask, was my revenge fair? Or should I have handled it differently? How would you have responded? I've made my peace with what happened, but I can't help wondering if there was another way. Either way, I'm moving forward. And this time, I'm doing it with my head held high.